Hey guys, what's happening? Chris here. Every game has their own set of mechanics that the player engages with in order to play a game. These mechanics are important because they set up the player experience and the core design of your game. That is why in today's video I'm going to talk about a game core loops and what they are, what makes a good core loop, and how to improve them. A core loop is essentially the activities that the player does in your game. They structure the entire game and have a looping sequence. Core loops are integral to the core of your game design, and if you change them, then the entire player experience of the game will also change. For example, if you take a game like the original Legend of Zelda, you will notice that everything the player does is in the following order. The player starts exploring the world, defeating enemies. Then, because of that exploration, the player might discover a dungeon. After that, they keep exploring the dungeon, beating more enemies and puzzles until they finally get to the boss, defeat it, and get a Triforce shard. Then, the cycle starts again, and the game goes back to exploring. This cycle repeats over and over again for the duration of the game, which makes it the core loop of the experience. However, the game designers add depth to this core loop by adding certain things like new items to combat enemies with, new enemies that are supporting the gameplay mechanics, and of course, surprises to keep the player on their toes. All of these things make the game feel fresh and new every time the player goes through the cycle. If these things weren't added to the experience, the game will feel pretty repetitive and boring, which would cause players to lose interest in the game and eventually stop playing. There can be more than one core loop in a game. For example, if the game offers you a quest, that can be a core loop in itself. Why? Well, because when you first get the quest, you do whatever the quest has asked you to do. Then, you return to the quest giver and you get your reward. You think you are done only for the next quest to start after talking to another NPC. Other core loops may have to do with skill systems, in which you fight enemies to get experience points, and that allows you to unlock skills that can help you beat tougher enemies. These examples are all smaller loops in the experience. However, I'm going to be talking about the core loop of the entire game, which is what serves as the foundation for your game. Core loops are very important in game design because they are essentially the heart of your game. They are not only the things that your player does over and over again, but also it is the foundation of your game's design and where you can build all of your other mechanics to support that foundation. Everything in a game design is connected, and the best games are those that have their loops interconnected in order to build upon one another. For example, in a game like Persona 5, choosing to have interaction with NPCs or leveling up your character skills allows you to increase your relationship level with them, thus gaining new skills that can help you in battle. It is not just to learn more about the story. But what makes good core loops? Well, ideally, a good core loop will teach the player about the behavior of a game and not making it confusing. You want the player to reach a state of flow, which refers to the user being fully engaged in the game with full attention and knowing what he needs to do in the game in order to progress. Users like games when they feel in control of what is happening, but also having a fair experience that is balanced and doesn't feel too hard or too easy. However, you can please every user, as players all vary in skills. For example, a game like Sekiro is considered a hard game only for people who like to be challenged over and over again. The loops in those games make sure that those users find them good and challenging, like losing all of your experience when you have been killed and having precise controls. All of these support the main loop of finding enemies to kill them and gain experience in order to be able to upgrade your stats. This in turn enables you to kill stronger enemies and so on. Another thing that makes a good game loop is for them to have a clear objective for the player. It doesn't have to be explicit, but players will get it from the mechanics of the game. For example, in a game like Mario, there is nothing that tells you that you need to move right or even how to jump. However, players after experimenting with the controls of the game and noticing how all the enemies are placed in the game, are going to know that they need to move from left to right, avoiding obstacles until they have reached the flag on the far right side. Another thing that makes a good core loop is that they should be simple, but at the same time allow for a lot of added complexity to expand the gameplay and possibilities within the game. A very good example of this is Rocket League. That game is really simple in terms of mechanics. It is just soccer with cars. Anyone will be able to play it. However, as you experiment more with the controls, you will notice that you can do certain movements like flips and turns that will allow more experienced players to get that flow feeling when they are playing. Essentially, what you're looking for here is easy to play but hard to master. But remember that not every game needs to have this. It will all depend on your player's experience. Furthermore, another aspect that will add to supporting a core loop in a game is good use of a theme. When you think about your game, you need to think about the story that is going to unify your game design choices as a coherent whole. I'm talking about the aesthetics, the story, and everything coming together to reinforce the theme. Journey is a game about life and connecting with others, and all the gameplay systems in that game, like the communication mechanic and the flying mechanic, support the gameplay experience of feeling connected to another person even though you don't really know them. Now, how can we improve core loops? Core loops are not going to be perfect from the first draft that designers come up with in pre-production. We need to iterate a lot in order to come up with something cool that makes sense. The best thing you can do to improve a core loop is to build a quick prototype and put it in front of people. Then asking them questions about that core loop and what they thought was the main thing they were doing in the game, and if they found it fun or boring. However, always try to avoid asking questions that have a yes or no answer, as they will provide more insight into what a person is thinking. After you get the feedback, you can go back to the drawing board and make the pertinent changes to your prototype and test again. This is the best way, since a lot of the time, when we think about how a game will be played, it is totally different from when we are actually playing it, so it is very important to build a playable prototype. And the good thing is that every successive prototype will become better and better until you finally get to a core loop that you're happy with and that you can build upon. Finally, after you have something that you like, you can add some refinements to it in terms of how it looks and how it plays in order to make it better. You can also add some juice or game feel to the prototype as you get further into development. However, always make sure to work on your core loop first and make sure that it is working properly before you decide to work on polishing or refining mechanics. This is because you don't want to dedicate a lot of time to something that will be changed anyways, and this will slow down development of the game and end up costing a lot of time and effort. Remember to get the basics down first in the simplest way possible, and then worry about polishing and making it look good later. And that's it, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. How have you made sure that your code loops are fun and engaging? Please let me know in the comment section below. Also, if you like this video, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. See you next time!